Nobody understood how Margaret's car ended up in this lake in the middle of the forest, but it quickly became clear that whoever dumped it here did not want it to be found again. The whole situation was shrouded in mystery right up until the trunk of the car was opened. Then it suddenly became clear to everybody what had happened here. It was a discovery that still has Margaret spooked until this very day. Margaret felt like she was on shaky legs as her car was being pulled out of the lake. It looked like it had not been in here for very long, but it had been gone for at least 2 months at this point. Where the hell could it have been in the meantime? Margaret would find out the disturbing truth very soon when she started to look through the car. When the police opened up the trunk of the car and Margaret saw what was inside, she nearly collapsed onto her knees while the police all jumped back in shock. Tears are starting to pour down Margaret's cheeks as all attention quickly shifts to her. But who had stolen Margaret's car? How had it ended up in the lake, and what did they find in the trunk? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It was a typical Monday morning when Margaret got this unexpected phone call from the police. They announced to her that they found her stolen car nearby the forest lake. The truth is that she didn't expect to see her car ever again. It was 2 whole months without any news. She felt happy and relieved because at this time she could not afford to buy a new one. The day that these people stole her car was hard for her. At the station, they reported her car stolen, and the police informed her that this was something that apparently happened a lot recently. Margaret hoped that this meant they would know how to help her, but this was not the actual truth, as it seemed they were not able to do much. Almost none of the cars that had been stolen in this manner had been recovered yet, so the odds to find Margaret's car were not good at all. They had no idea yet who were those people or why they stole cars all this time. The police were shocked by the case, but they promised to add Margaret's car details to the list with the other stolen cars, so they were going to keep an eye out for it. At this point, Margaret still had a bit of hope, but as the days were passing by, her hope slowly faded. The days became weeks and weeks became months. Already it had been 2 months since Margaret didn't hear anything about her car. Suddenly, one morning, Margaret finally got a call about her car. She had actually forgotten about it at this point and was stunned when she picked up the phone. When she picked up the phone, she heard a really familiar voice. The person that called was an old friend of hers. She hadn't spoken to him for a couple of years now. The biggest surprise was that he called her about her missing car. She felt really relieved and happy because she believed that she would never find her car. Apparently, he had seen the post about the stolen car that Margaret posted on Facebook. The photo had stuck in his mind for months, and he thought about it quite often. One day, as he took his daily walk, he actually saw the car. He was really excited about this, so he decided to call her as soon as possible. For the first couple of minutes, she was ecstatic that her car had been found and she wanted to go and pick it up immediately. But her friend had some bad news for Margaret. The car was not as accessible as Margaret thought at first. The friend described to her where exactly he had found the missing car, and Margaret has started to lose hope again. He explained to Margaret that the car was not in a state where she could come to pick it up at all. The man encountered the car in the middle of a lake located in the local forest. At first, he couldn't recognize the car, but after a couple of minutes, he realized that the car was the same as Margaret's missing car. The biggest question was why the car ended up at this spot, why these people stole the car and then abandoned it in the middle of the lake. Margaret's heart sank when she heard that her car was in the lake. She had already been compensated somewhat by the insurance company, so there was not even a good reason for her to go and get her car. After a while, she thought that this might be a useful clue for the police's investigation. Margaret knew that this case was very important for the police, and they were still working on it. She believed that this could be the lead that they needed. So she made the decision to call the police station and inform them about what her friend found out. When she called the police, they told her that they going immediately pick her up to go and find the car. The friend that had called Margaret was going to be there as well. The police officer knew that this was their only chance to detect this whole mystery of the missing cars. The police were baffled as to how somebody managed to put the car in the middle of the lake. So they started to doubt if Margaret's friend said the truth about what he saw that day. Their main question was, why did they steal a car and then drive it in the middle of a lake? After a lot of thinking, the police had already a pretty good idea of why this car had ended up in the lake. The most believable conclusion was that the person that stole the car did not want them to ever find it again. The only thing that they have to do now was to make it to the lake and reach the car. After 2 whole hours of trying, they finally made it to the lake. There they met Margaret's friend and his dog. They quickly observed the car in the lake as well, so now the only thing that they had to do now was to reach the car. They were so close to solving this case and finding out what really happened that day. The friend and his dog were still waiting for Margaret and the police. A tow truck was about 15 minutes behind them, but was having even more trouble traversing the difficult terrain. Why was the car left behind in such an abandoned place? Nobody could have guessed the true reason. One of the officers had already got himself into a diving suit. Somebody needed to get into the water to hook up the truck, but in the time they had to wait, he was already getting into the lake to get a better look at the car. He could not open anything so as not to let any more water flow into the car, but he could check out the outside and immediately noticed that it was covered in scratches. The driver had apparently not been very careful while making his way through the trees. There was certainly a reason for that. He must have been in a hurry. This was strange, as they had not seen any damaged trees on the way here, so they had assumed that the car had been driven here carefully. The officer that was still on the shore started looking around and quickly found another path that did have some markings or scratched off black paint on the trees. But this path only led deeper into the forest. Why was the driver even there in the first place? It didn't make any sense whatsoever. While they were wondering about why and how the car had come from this direction, the tow truck finally arrived, and the priority became getting the car out of the water. The officer in the water attached the hook of the tow truck to the back of the car, and when they made sure that it was secure, the car was starting to get reeled in slowly towards the shore. When the car finally made its way onto land again, it was a pleasant surprise to find that it had not completely flooded with water. The car could not have been in the lake for very long, so the police took this opportunity to start dusting for fingerprints, as this could very well lead to a break in the car thief case. While one officer was inspecting the inside of the car, the second one eventually got to trying to open up the trunk of the car. This was not easy, as Margaret's key did not seem to work anymore. It was probably because the car was pretty damaged. One officer grabbed his crowbar. He ended up using a crowbar, and after a few attempts, he managed to fully pop open the trunk, realizing its very surprising contents. Margaret's was the first one to see it. Her mouth fell open and she fell on her knees. What did she see? The officer put on gloves before he dared to touch anything in the trunk of the car, and only when he laid it all out on the ground did they get an idea of the full scale of what they found. Even the officers were very surprised with what they had found. They tried calming Margaret. In the trunk were bags full of water-damaged money and substances that would probably have been sold to make this kind of money. This could be one of the biggest local busts in recent memory. They certainly hadn't seen anything like this before. But why was the car dumped in the water? Now all the officers wanted to do was follow the apparent route this car had come from to find out where it had come from with all of this. They made their way through the narrow path till they eventually reached a small shed far away from civilization, and some of the cars that had recently been stolen were parked outside of it. They had probably found their thief. Who was it? When they busted in the door, it became clear that nobody was there anymore, and by the looks of this, they had made a good effort to erase all their tracks. Maybe they already feared that the police were on their trail. They started to check for little traces. But as it would turn out, they missed a lot of details when making their getaway, and the police managed to collect a lot of fingerprints and even DNA samples from the shed and the cars. Now they got them. They knew they were going to find whoever was responsible, sooner than they thought. This quickly led to a few arrests and, in time, also to an explanation for what had exactly been going on here. Apparently, the shed was an illegal production lab and also a base of operation for the local supplier and his crew of dealers. They stole cars that the dealer used to transport the money and product all the way through the forest. They had switch points on the outskirts of the woods where they would get in their own undamaged cars and they would sell out of those. This was the biggest bust of the century. The supplier felt secure in his forest shed, but when one of his dealers got arrested recently, he got cold feet. This is why Margaret's car got driven in the lake. They thought they erased the traces. Afraid that he would be ratted out, he decided to pack up everything and make a run for it. He tried to destroy all the evidence, which also included dumping a car with supplies in the lake. But in his haste, he had forgotten that there was also still money in there. That was the crucial mistake. The first arrest made in this case led to a chain reaction, at the end of which everybody involved was going to get their day in court. Margaret and the friend also got a handsome reward for their part in getting these people arrested. Margaret could buy a new car, and she honored for her part in all of this.